It's great to be here, and thank you very much for joining us. And again, the topic is a very important one, and I hope you'll go away with some practical ideas and suggestions to help in your context. Now, we're covering quite a lot of levels, so obviously we can't look at every part of the exam for each level, but we're going to look at some principles, and we're going to look at some of the skills needed in listening and needed, of course, in preparing for a Cambridge English qualification. So that will be something we're looking at. We'll also be looking at how they're assessed, and also ideas for developing those skills for each part of the test. And of course, we'd like to look at some ideas for the classroom and some resources that you might like to experiment that may supplement what you're using in your course book. So let's get started by asking you a little question for the chat about how do your students feel about listening? Is it a kind of 10, they think fantastic, it's easy for me, or do they think 1, it's more difficult than perhaps the other skills? So if you just give me a number between 1, not very happy about listening in English, to 10, very happy about listening in English. Let's see what you say about that. Let's see if I can see the chat. Okay, so see what, okay, I can see some ideas coming up there. And okay, we've got some 5s and 6s, some 8 to 10, a real contrast for Suzanne with 3 and 4. And I think that's one of the challenges, of course, is that discrepancy between different people in the class. Well, thank you for doing that for me. That really gives me an idea of how wide the differences are. And I think that is one of the challenges for all of us. But I will say one thing, that's what I have noticed, and I think we are generally noticing that because students are doing more listening, perhaps either for gaming, or they're watching YouTube, or they're listening on the internet, there seems to be hope that there is some improvement in listening in a positive way. But let's see what else we can do about listening. And I thought we would quote Penny who some of you may have seen at the CLET event this year, which is very interesting, because she said listening is probably the most important of the 4 skills. It's the starting point for learning any living language, and most people spend more time listening, including listening during conversation, than they do speaking, reading, or writing. So an incredibly important skill, and an incredibly important skill to help language development. And we just really think about the way that children develop language, of course, is that they listen for 2 years, basically, before they really start to speak. And that the language development that listening allows is incredibly powerful. So the more listening we do, obviously, the better for everyone. But that's something we'll look at. However, as some of you have pointed out, sometimes learners find listening a bit of a challenge, and it's quite useful to think about those challenges. And I thought this picture really shows it, sort of trying to, find your way to understand something that feels sometimes there's a barrier, and some of those barriers are things like this. So what kind of challenges do learners face with listening? And let's see if you recognize some of these for your students. So feeling under pressure, so certainly if they're doing it in class or doing it as an exercise, the idea of getting the answers right is quite stressful. Don't want to be not understanding. And then the other thing, the common problem, and I remember this myself as a learner, when is trying to understand every word. And this is, for me, the most important change that we can help learners undertake, which will make a difference to their success in listening, and of course their success in the listening part of the exam. So really, really, really important. This is another challenge, of course, with connected speech, it's obviously more difficult to distinguish individual sounds, especially when you're at lower levels, and getting used to the idea that sometimes you may not be able to make that distinction, but you have to go for the overall meaning is quite difficult for some students, especially young ones who've never thought about it and think that they have to understand everything. Also, often we're in a situation where there is no visual clue. Of course, being on the phone is a common situation, although these days, of course, many people are making video calls, but often we're listening without visuals. And of course, when you're taking the exam, there are certain types of supporting visuals, which we'll talk about, but you're not actually getting the visual clues of the reaction of the person that you have perhaps in conversation when you're face to face. Limited vocabulary, especially at the lower levels, and not always, having to be able to work with not understanding every word, and some of the vocabulary can be challenging. And last but not least, often some of the problems are related to not enough practice and maybe not enough guidance. So this is something where clearly teachers can make a difference. And the idea of this session is really looking at guidance and helping students become aware of listening in a more generic sense, not trying to just learn, listen, understand everything. Now, if you think about your own context, which three would you put as the most relevant challenges to your situation? And if you'd just like to share that in the chat, or just even one, and maybe I should have numbered it to make it easier for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It might be easier than writing the whole sentence. So if you'd like to put the most relevant to you in your context with your learners, use a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Let's have a look. Depends. I see Ekaterina has written, yeah, they were afraid of making mistakes with pronunciation. Thank you. That will come back for that as well. Limited vocabulary. Lovely. Great. Interesting. 3, inability to distinguish individual sounds and perhaps not understanding why they can't, which is also interesting. 5, limited vocabulary, and of course not enough practice. Okay, so thank you for that. And one of the things that I think we perhaps can do very overtly is thinking about our approach to listening. And one of the things is helping students to feel relaxed and prepared, and not that they should be worrying about not understanding everything all the time. And if you think about it, it's when students are perhaps coming to your class, they may have been in some other subject and they need time to kind of tune in and, if you like, a sort of sound check to moving from studying in their own language or studying in another language and then coming into their English class. And if you think about it, it's a bit like warm up if you're doing sport. We can make that analogy that perhaps you do a little bit something before you do something more challenging. So it could be small things at the beginning of a lesson to help the students tune in to being in that English context. Something as simple as this activity here. Now, I've got some pictures and I've got some words. And what I'd like you to do is try and create a sentence using those 4 words. So just a short sentence using those words. And if you can, write that in the chat. So the idea, and you'll see what we'll do with it in a moment. And of course, we've got we've got the homonyms, which sound alike but have different meaning. So again, some of the issues around not always understanding the word can be related also to the fact that the word is written and spoken in the same way but has a different meaning. So let's have a look if anybody can think of a little sentence to put those 4 words into. Lovely. With witch, watches the witching. Lovely, super. You've got some great ideas and some quite long sentences as well. Fantastic. Okay, well, this is just a suggestion. So if two witches were watching two watches, which witch would which witch would watch which watch? It's difficult for me too. But of course, what we're doing is obviously practicing vocabulary, a little bit of listening and thinking about pronunciation. So somebody was commenting on pronunciation, doing a warm up. Also, as long as it's students can have fun with it, they're playing with the words, and they're obviously listening very consciously to words in this. So a quick warm up, and obviously you can change the word that you want to focus on or the sound you want to focus on. So thank you for your contributions. The other thing, of course, is that when the students come into your class, they've got live listening with you. So teacher talking time, many times when we're training with our teacher shouldn't talk too much, but actually it is a source of listening, and it's a way of combining personalization and building rapport. The student may only have to react to you, but not have to speak immediately, because again, as we say, with the idea of this is tuning in to being able to listen, and also, of course, it's a way to develop rapport at the same time. And it may be appropriate in some circumstances that you record something and send it to your students. So again, they're doing a little listening, real live listening, if you like, or personalized listening, which could also be quite motivating and encouraging. And obviously you were looking at engaging and motivating learners in the last session. So again, in the context of listening, how can we engage learners more personally in the listening? So in terms of approach, it's important to build over time. It's not something that happens immediately, certainly depending on how long your students have been working on this skill, of course, and frequent practice in and out of class. And we'll talk about some activities for that. Focusing on listening sub-skills, and this is a big part of today's session and ways to think about that. And also allowing students to work together so that they're not feeling alone when they're doing a listening activity, that maybe they listen, talk to someone, share what they understand, and then respond to the questions, rather than feeling I need to understand on my own and I can't, or I'm finding it difficult. So there's also the integrated speaking and listening in that way of approaching it. And of course, very important that we're not talking about doing listening all under test conditions all the time. Even if we're doing test practice, then I think it would be quite useful, because we do need to reduce anxiety, and reducing anxiety is about practice, being prepared, knowing what to expect, and of course, having the opportunity to practice to reduce that anxiety, and it takes time. So that begs the question, what does effective listening actually involve? And here I turn to you to think about the sub-skills, and if you could just list a few of those sub-skills that really help make effective listening. If you're using, which sub-skills would you list? And I can see lots of things being written, which is great. So, okay. Concentration and focus. Yes, absolutely. Concentration. Okay. Reflecting and guessing. Okay. Lovely. Silence. Yes. Verbal clue, non-verbal clues, all those things like that. The motivation to listen, listening for keywords. Now we're getting some techniques coming in there, some strategies for actually listening. And I think those strategies are the ones that we really need to be focusing on to help students have a framework that pre-listening, pre-listening activities, absolutely. So I'm going to answer that question, of course, by saying, okay, what does effective listening involve? Well, it involves those sub-skills. Now, I think I agree that you've written other things as well, which are not included in the sub-skills, but they are going to have an impact on how students approach listening, but also how they feel about listening. So let's think about those specific skills. So listening for gist, listening for specific information, it's not quite the same. Listening for mood and attitude, certainly as we get to higher levels. And so we're getting towards B1, B2 as well, perhaps not so much at A2. Understanding meaning from context, so using the context, and some of you are saying you understanding using the questions. And predicting content skills is learning to predict and realizing that that is actually a skill you do in your own language, and perhaps you're not transferring it consciously into when you're learning English. So I think it's really helpful for students to see an example of the sub skills so that they can start understanding skin. But what about understanding what it really means in practice? So I think a practical example like this task, which you will be able to find in one of the resources that I mentioned. So you give them the context and you have to say, okay, which sub-skill is this one representing? So I'll just give you a moment to read that. Which sub-skill is this? Again, if you don't want to write the whole sentence, you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Specific information, thank you. Okay, lovely. So listening for specific information, absolutely. So that you don't want to miss that train. But it's the student starts to be able to relate to what we mean by specific. You're not interested in listening to anything else. You want to hear about your particular train. So what about the second one? Okay, just give you a moment. Okay, we've got lots of, okay, lovely, exactly. So yes, of course, it's prediction. This is really important. And it starts, students would say, they do that in their own language. Now you need to transfer that strategy into English. Okay. You listen carefully. And opinion. So that's also quite important. You're listening for that opinion aspect. So we have one more. Exactly. And here we just want to have the idea. We're not going to remember the detail. We don't need the detail, but we kind of get an impression. So absolutely. So this is a task to help students understand the difference between the skills. The other question is, what is bottom-up processing? And you can choose between A or B. Again, quick opportunity to put it in the chat. Do you think bottom is A or B? Absolutely. It's an easy one, I know, but I think it's very important, again, for students to see that actually you approach listening from two directions, if you like, looking at the detail, and bottom, of course, is focusing on the units of sound, and we'll have a little look at the example. As you put the bits together, you make a word, then you make a sentence, and of course, that's what we call bottom-up processing. And if we look at top down, looking at the bigger picture, and of course, using the context to make sense of unfamiliar words. And this is that problem of students not knowing vocabulary, being able to use the context to make sense, even if they don't know exactly what the word means. So working out meaning from context, really important. So I've got a funny little task. This is for only advanced students. And of course, I thought I would just show you the problem of bottom-up processing as a dictation. I'm going to say a word, And what I want you to do is try what I am saying on the other side. So I'll give you an example. Mice pies. And you'll see that on the right in B, we have my spies. Let me give you another one. Great apes. Now, what do you hear? Great apes. Try the next one. Send them the maid. Number 4, carpet. So you can see now what I will show you. Thank you, done very well there. I can see, fantastic. In fact, let me show you the list that I was showing. Now, of course, what happens is mice pies. It sounds like my spies. Great apes sounds like great apes, and of course, without any context, it's obviously quite hard to make that distinction. Now, as advanced learners, you probably can do that more easily, but you can see how ice cream, and ice train, ice train, they're very interesting to show that challenge. The other is to show the importance of where you put stress in a so if we have the discrimination, we have, if I ask you to listen and choose A or B, and I'm going to use obviously stress to help me with this. So she wants a present. Not she wants her presents. So obviously I'm going to focus on the word that's different. If I choose number 2, 2 pens are mine. 2 pens are mine. 2 pens are mine, I have to do, but 2 pens of mine, I'm actually going to change the way I stress it. So again, this kind of discrimination at this word level and also sound level is an example of working on bottom up and helping students see that sometimes they will find it challenging for these reasons, and that's normal. And so therefore the importance of the context. Now there is an activity that I will just show you, because I'm afraid I can't play the sound, but it doesn't matter because you'll be able to download the sound and the guide that I'm referring to. Where this is even at A2, you try an activity after doing a normal listening activity. You take a short phrase from the audio and you play that phrase. So you just cue it and you just micro listening. So we're looking at bottom up listening. So for example, I'm going to ask the students that when they hear the word but, how many other words do they hear after but? So they're really focusing on detail at this point. So this is from the tape script. Yeah, with my sister, she loves it, but, so that's where they have to start counting. And obviously with the little piece of listening audio that you play them, here we go. She loves it, but, and the audio says, I'm not as keen as she is. Yeah, with my sister, she loves it, but I'm not as keen as she is. And of course, they're going to count how many. I'm is going to count as one. In this case, obviously, not keen as she is. So they, really listening to the detail. And then with a micro listening phrase on the board, what we can do is listen again and look at where the words are stressed. I'm not as keen as she is. I'm not as keen as she is, for example, that you would hear from the tape. So again, awareness of the connected speech. So how does that help students? I'm just moving by mistake. And obviously, why are the words stressed? Because we want to put meaning on those words, and the others are the content words rather than the grammar words, and there's also that to consider. So there we have the content words being more stressed than the grammar words. How does this micro listening help learners? Well, it raises awareness of sounds and, of course, of stressed words. So they start to listen out for those unstressed listen for the stressed ones, and that there will be these unstressed words as well. So it's noticing and also giving them understanding that they're not going to understand every single word all the time, and that's okay and it's normal. So it helps them become better listeners. Now, when we talk about the exams, of course, there is a range of listening material, and that's deliberately done. So you're going to be looking at, obviously, across the 3 levels with formal and informal conversation, recorded messages, answer a news broadcast, a radio discussion, a kind of like presentation, a speech, maybe a sort of interview. So you can see that the variety of material allows for different types of tasks, which of course test different aspects of listening. And I thought you might find it useful to see how across the levels, the tasks are actually building. So we can see at A2, there are actually 5 tasks, whereas when we get to B1 and B2, which are the ones we're focusing on today, and there are actually only 4 tasks. But you can see that where the colours are, is that the tasks are similar across the level, even if they're not in the same order. And of course, they're developing similar skills. So the students who've done A2 are building on their listening skills. When they get to B1, they'll be more familiar. And when they get to B2, they'll be more familiar because they've already laid the foundation. And then and it continues as they go up the level. So you can see that also the order of the task becomes more similar, which is just informational. So when we break it down, of course, we're going to have little examples of monologues, dialogues, what kind of support is in the exam question that we can exploit with students, because they haven't got any other visual clues, but they have got some visual clues and information in the exam question that they can use as they would if they were in a live speaking context, because they're using it to help them get some context. So we can see how obviously the skills are developing as we go up the levels. Now, there are these 3 amazing guides for teachers. There are actually one for each level, but I only mentioned the 3, A2, B1 and B2. This is available in the references. And for each level, in the guide for teachers, you will see exactly what the task is, what the learner has to do, and as you will see at the end, very importantly, which listening skill is being tested. And of course, that feels you'll be fully informed, and we can just see how that reflects what I showed you before in the diagram. But this information is very overtly available, and I think it's really helpful. But it shows the importance of making sure we're doing different kinds of listening activities, not always the same kind, and that students also know that they will be doing listening in a different way depending on what they're listening to and why they're listening to it. So there are also worksheets for students so that you can use them for familiarity, because again, that will help the stress factor. The more familiar they are, they know what they're going to do, what to expect, and they've practiced that will definitely help them perform better when they're in the exam. So again, from a teacher's point of view, everything I say and more are in the handbooks for teachers, which you can download. There's a full section on listening. You can download the audio as well if you want to use the questions within the handbook, so that you can also use them as practice questions to help you in your lessons. So those are QR code, but again, we will make sure you have reference to those in the resources. So looking at developing listening in the classroom, there are things to think about. One is that doing listening in the classroom is important, but also doing listening outside the classroom obviously extends the opportunity for your students to absorb more English and to become better listeners by doing things outside. So very briefly, the advantages of doing it in a class is that everybody's doing the same material, and as a teacher, you'll be able to monitor how people are doing. And of course, the other thing is that we can check it as a group, and of course, share experience of it. The teacher is very much in control in this context, and of course, able to give feedback to everyone. Now, there are some challenges with that. It might be too easy for some, and it might be too difficult for others. And of course, if you don't have good equipment, or you have problems with the equipment, then it could make it challenging for you. And I think sometimes teachers may be worried about the equipment or listening in class because of some of these challenges. A little and often is better perhaps than doing a lot of listening in one lesson and no listening for the next few, perhaps a little bit in your lesson. So listen, the asynchronous, of course, doing it independently is that maybe we can encourage students to listen to what they're interested in, so they're more likely to listen. And of course, you can do the listening before they come to class. So you may have something in your course book you want them to listen to. And the good thing is, of course, access to audio is so much easier now. Many course books will have a QR code, and so the student can access the listening very easily. And of course, what we're doing is encouraging independence and developing agency by encouraging students to do that listening. And if they start to see a benefit of it, then maybe they will do that. Of course, there are negatives, that you've got to deal with the follow-up. Some of them may not do it, but let's be positive. Many of them will, if it's an interesting a task, or they can see the relevance of it. And then, it's maybe not so easy to measure whether they did it to their best ability because you're not there when they do it. And of course, you can't give feedback immediately, but there are exercises that give feedback to students immediately so they can also monitor their progress. So I think it's important to include both and a little rather than a great chat to help keep learners engaged, and of course integrating it with other skills. I always think this is very relevant that learners, if they are doing it asynchronously, have more control and perhaps will listen to it more than once. And that's the other philosophy. It's not about listening to it once and thinking, oh, I didn't understand. It maybe you need to listen to it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, and each time you progress, and encouraging that. It's a little bit, you can't say, can you say it again when you're doing the listening exam, but you can get the idea of the repetition in developing that skill to develop confidence. So strategies for listening skills. Somebody said it in the chat, but pre-listening activities really are, for me, the key to making a difference. So it's about preparation in terms of preparing for the task, preparing for the context, so that students are ready to listen rather than, oh gosh, it's number 3, I've got to do that. So preparing to listen, number 1 skill, prediction, and also, what do I know about this before? Activate that schemata so it's going to be easier for me to listen. And of course, if I think about the topic, then I may discover I actually know quite a lot, and it will help me in my listening. And maybe I can think about the vocabulary I would expect to hear. So developing top-down listening skills with your students, the insights are prepare to listen, prepare to understand. Looking at the topic, what vocabulary. Maybe sometimes you're pre-teaching vocabulary when we're in the learning stage. Obviously, that won't happen in the exam. Practice makes perfect, and if we use the exam question, as I said earlier, they know what to look for on the day. They can do it quickly. So you'll see the guide that I mentioned before in purple version and in green version. The content inside is the same. It just looks a bit different. It's been rearranged, but they are actually the same. So there are, in the guides, there are lots of top tips, and one of them, of course, is encouraging us to look at top-down strategies. And I wanted just to talk about some of those at different levels. So at key, we have these wonderful pictures, which of course we can do a lot of work on, a lot of anticipation. What do you think, which part of the body in this particular case, what vocabulary can we perhaps expect to hear when we see that picture or that question? Really simple. And by the way, if you take the paper-based exam, it's black and white. If you take the new Cambridge English Qualifications digital, they get it in colour, so even better. But obviously the task is exactly the same. By using multiple choice questions, the short extracts in key and preliminary, and again, I can't play the audio, but I can tell you the activity is that you listen to it and obviously get them to find the answer. So in this case, we're talking about sausages, chickens, and hamburger. I'm not sure what the vegetarian option is. Maybe they're vegetarian sausages. But the idea is that we do the activity, but we also use the tape script. And by using the tape script, obviously we can highlight where the answer is. And obviously we can also take a different point of view. Just got to click, there we are. If the answer was different, you know, how could you change the question so that if the answer was different? So they're thinking, because although the dialogue is the same, if you change the question, the answer would be different. So then you start to see how important the question is, even if you've got the same information. So we can, in this particular case, we've written 3 different questions, which are not the original one, because it shows that if the question is different, then the answer will be different. So the importance of looking at the question. Now, this is a part of gap filling, is listening for specific information, is a task that you see across levels. So again, in the handbook for teachers, you will always find an explanation of task and ideas of how you can develop the skills for that task. So in this particular one, when they are looking at listening to information about a trip, we start immediately getting students to look at the gap without listening and see if they could predict what kind of word is it going to be. We can see it's going to be a time. It's going to be, you can see the different categories that students need to listen out for. So again, it's helping that prediction and also helping them focus on what they need to listen for without, using the structure of the question. We see it in B2 first, we see it in B1, and again, I think this is a nice way where we can take an exam question and develop it into some pre-listening activity as well as the while listening activity, and obviously we can discuss the answers after. But this one is about the B2 one, gap filling, and how many different seabirds can you think of? Now, obviously, this is not something you would expect B2 to be able to do. I can't do these birds, but this is really for you. How many seabirds are there using a picture? But actually, the word we're looking for is puffin, because the listening is about puffins. And before we do the listening, this opportunity to, can you find out 3 facts about puffins? What would you like to know about puffins? Now, without the exam question, we then listen to the text, and we see if we find out anything about that they have said. What they found 3 things, and is any of their information in the text they didn't know. So they're not worrying about the exam question. Listen and check, do it again, compare with your partner, so you're not in isolation. And then the actual note-taking activity is this one, where, again, we get the students to think about the word that goes in the gap. I haven't given you time to actually read it, but you can get the principle by seeing the answers here. We actually get them to start thinking about what would go in that space so that I can start listening with a focus. The other thing is, well, why don't we try and predict the answer? Again, without listening to the tape, but looking at the sentences. And here is my attempt. Here are my attempts. So I think it might be one of these, these potential answers. And now we listen to the tape. Then we to the tape script. And as we listen, we see if any of the answers that I predicted are correct. Well, I put strange, but the word is funny, so similar. In this case, the answer I got was wrong. And this case, actually, one of my answers was correct. And in this case, it was wrong. But it gives them some focus. And it's that idea of predicting the answer, which is so valuable. Listening, same task at B1. And again, a slightly obviously slightly easier, but why not practice it in a fun way? So one of the things that you can do is take sentences from the dialogues, and ask them to listen to the audio and hear which of the phrases you hear below. So we're kind of focusing on that there. So you would play each one. Of course, I can't get the sound to work, so sorry about that. But then, of course, as you go through, we play the answer. Why not do it with a song, which I think is a great thing to do. Simple song, some of you know it, but it could be a more up-to-date song. But the Bluetooth songs work very well. And then, of course, we listen for the words. You also need some extra words, but the motivation to do this activity is obviously, interesting because of the music, but it's the skill is what we have to use in the exam. And of course, then we can obviously work on some gap filling, which in a similar way to the exam task, but obviously not, and we fill in the words. And again, they may be able to predict the answer before they listen as well. Now, if you want to create this, there are some ways, and this is a resource which I've been using called TWE, and it allows you to create activities for listening. And TWE allows you to actually create the gaps. So I've put in here, fill the gap. I put in the song, the words of the song, and I can highlight the words I want to remove, press the blue button which says do the magic, and then it will, so there you can see how I've highlighted the words that I want to remove, and then it makes me the worksheet, and it also gives me the answer sheet. So much quicker way to do it. And of course you can edit it, and of course this is another tool which is similar as well, so you can do the same thing. So creating your own gap fill for listening for specific information, like the one that we just mentioned. The other thing, if you haven't been using it, I really recommend Lyrics Training. Lyrics Training is free, and you can sign up for a profile. But the students can listen to a song, and many are up-to-date songs, and they listen at different levels, whether that's beginner, intermediate, or advanced. And the song will stop, and so they have to listen and write the word that's missing. So it's great fun, and of course you can choose appropriate songs for your students, or maybe if they're working independently, they would also do it. So lyricstraining.com, if you haven't explored it yet, it certainly makes a difference. So in part 3, and here we're talking for schools, but we're listening to monologues, and we listen to monologues elsewhere as well. And of course, we have to listen to statements that match. Now, this is where the importance of teaching teaching paraphrase becomes very important, because of course that word spotting danger that students often have isn't helpful. And so helping students to move away from word spotting to perhaps listening for the paraphrase in the listening. We just get students to look at these two sentences, for example, taken from the tape script, actually, and we ask them to create a paraphrase of it. So, taking photos makes me feel confident. I feel sure of myself when I'm behind the camera. It motivates me. So anyway, you get the idea, is that we try to help students so that they don't get stuck on trying to listen for a specific sentence that they see in the question. So we can do that in different ways. Paraphrase racing is an activity where you listen to a short audio clip. They write down as many ways to rephrase the main ideas as possible. So not necessarily the sentence, but the main idea. So again, the idea of paraphrasing. Learners compare the paraphrases with a peer and share their ideas. So paraphrase is important. The second idea is synonym matching. So we create a list of words from the B2 sample listening, or the A2, whichever one you're using, and practice matching the words with their synonyms under time pressure. So again, obviously it's vocabulary development, but it's also that concept of the paraphrase and not trying to always listen for the same words within the text, which they might hear, but it'd be misleading. So again, we need to be aware of the distractors that might be designed. So again, helping to see reverse paraphrasing, they have to guess the original wording or find it in the audio script from the statements. So again, I think it increases flexibility and really makes a big difference. And they'll need paraphrase, helps for gist, prediction, understanding vocabulary. So evidence swapping. When your students are doing a listening activity, one of the things is that they listen to the audio twice and then they look at the audio script. So using an audio script, and you will find the audio script in the handbooks and many times in your course books, to exchange ideas on how they found the question, the answer to the question. And the nice thing is to get them to highlight the answer, and then their peer have to realize which question the highlighting is answering. So again, a slightly different approach to doing the same thing, but gets them to be more flexible. Digital age, I've mentioned some already, but of course, we do have more access to audio than we do. Be careful about putting any copyright material or tape scripts into AI. Don't do that, because you lose control of it. So make sure that anything you're using is available on the internet, not just from a copyright from your book. Don't do that. But YouTube is a wonderful source. And one particular activity I like is this teenager. She does an introduction of herself. And what we can do is go back to TWE, and TWE will allow you to get the transcript from the YouTube video, which is amazing. So you put in your YouTube video link, and then we can make some activities on this. So again, to help with listening, might be we ask it to create some multiple choice questions. So here is a very simple example. So they will listen to the YouTube video now. Teacher's point of view, yes, you should always check what AI is doing, but it will give you a good start. And in this particular case, it gives you the answers as well, which I think is fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. So moving fast to give you a wide range of activities to choose from. I hope there'll be something depending for everyone, because you obviously have different levels. Part one, and again, I've chosen the example from B2, but it can be from others as well. We need to be aware of feeling, attitude, and we're using gist and detail. So again, we would take an example. You hear it, which you can't hear, so I won't. I'm listening to it, which is not good. But there's basically, we take the one short text. Look at the answer and then look at the tape script, because what we can do with it is change the conversation. So after listening to the dialogue, ask the learners to imagine how the conversation might have ended differently. And so again, it's the idea of that flexibility, and it gives some language work. So here's the original script. When I was a little kid, my father used to watch a lot of old movies, and I sat with him and loved them too, especially the musicals. So you see, my career was inspired by him in a way, and these old movies played a big part in my life. They were the reason I wanted to learn to sing. So we asked the students to change the conversation, and here is an example of having changed some of the content, having changed some of the grammar, but not changing the length very much. And again, what we can do then is, of course, talk about the differences and practice with the vocabulary. And we can use generative AI. And for your information, there is a free pack of ideas called the Generative AI Idea Pack from Cambridge, which you can download for free. And it includes this example of using an AI platform, Gemini. It could be ChatGPT, it could be Microsoft Copilot, and putting in a prompt. Please create 10 questions focusing on the grammar using the vocabulary from the audio script. Now, if you're using the audio script from the Handbook for Teachers, that's fine, because they are already internet, so you can use them to do that. And then it does this wonderful thing, like create you some grammar and vocabulary questions, which obviously you need to check, but wonderful possibility to extend what you're doing with the text. So last but not least, in terms of tools, I want to mention text to audio, and this is one platform, Narrakeet, which you can put the text in and change the accent. So again,
Sarah, we could hear that audio earlier on. So if you wanted to give it a try.
Should I try? Yes.
Yeah, because we could hear it. So, if you wanted to, we could try.
Yeah. Not sure if you can hear it. Can you hear that one? Not sure.
No, sorry, can't hear it. Sorry about that. I thought we might be able to.
I can hear it. Sorry. Okay, so never mind, you'll be able to experiment with yourself. You can see I put the same text into Narrakeet, and I've chosen a Scottish accent, so you can hear it read with a different accent, which is quite fun, and of course helps students get used to different accents. There will be slightly different accents. They're always very clear in the exam, but there will be some kind of accent. So this is again an interesting thing to try out with the accents. So listening for different accents, understanding the exam format, and obviously developing new vocabulary. So with that kind of race through lots of potential activities, I really want to say that what the message here is that little and often, but helping students to be exposed to spoken English as often as possible, do it different voices, different activities. Of course, if you can, and if it's appropriate for your group, to get your students thinking about podcasts, radio programs, informal conversations, looking at YouTube, then it's really important. Now, the exam preparation resources on the Cambridge website take you to each level, and you can choose obviously the listening sections for the level that you're interested in, and you can find these guides, which I recommend, because you can take a slower visit just to each of the exam questions, get the kind of standard message with ideas to how you can make sure that your students are familiar with what they need to do, and that you're finding ways to practice different listening skills. This is worth mentioning is the World of Better Learning blog has lots of topics, including, of course, you can look at listening. And one of the interesting things is how to use Netflix and TV to encourage listening skills. So again, slightly different, not necessarily exam practice, but with the principle that we want to get our students to do as much listening. And if they're interested and motivated, then they're going to be more willing to. So if you say how TV to promote listening, have a look at this blog post. It will give you practical ideas. I also mentioned some non-Cambridge resources which are free to use. LO, I think, is hilarious. It's got 3 L's, which has natural English conversations at different levels. Breaking news I particularly like, because you can listen to the same topic at different levels, and you can also change the speed of the actual audio. So, and there are activities that go with it, and it's free. So it's quite amazing. So you may find that supplements what you're doing in your course book with the same theme, for example. So we've been looking at A2 to B2. You can see that many of the listening strategies are the same across the levels. And of course, developing up the levels will help students become more confident as they move from one to the other. And obviously the extension of grammar and vocabulary, but they will be able to use those listening skills. And hopefully that will help them prepare more confidently and with more fun for the listening part of the exam. And they will also benefit from that listening that will help them develop their language competence overall anyway. So you will be getting a nice set of resources. But if you think about this session, maybe there are 3 things that you know about developing listening skills, or you've thought about today that will be useful. You might have, I hope you have 2 ideas to develop listening skills for your learners. And when you're talking to other teachers about listening, what would you advise them as a result? Sadly, I haven't got time for the feedback, but I hope you can think about those things and find that useful. So thank you very much for being with us.